Well, hello and welcome everyone to the first of 3 online sessions marking the 10th anniversary of the Center for Critical Qualitative Health Research at the University of Toronto. Welcome longtime friends of the Center, members of the CQ diaspora, and a warm hello also to all of you who are new to CQ and to our sessions here. We're delighted to have you with us. My name is Blake Poland. I'm a senior fellow and longtime member of the Center and chair of the organizing committee, and I'll be your MC today. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, Wendat, Huron, and Haudenosaunee Indigenous peoples on which the Dahlana School of Public Health now stands. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We would also like to pay respects to all of our ancestors and to our present elders. A few quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to all of you. Presenter slides will also be shared where we have their agreement to do so. There will also be a Q&A at the end of the keynote and after the panel. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. You see a little graphic there showing you where to find that. Chat function has not been enabled for this webinar, given the size of the attendance. There are a number of ways to connect with us. We have a networking and ideas wall called Padlet. You can see the link there above. Please feel free to pop into that space and introduce yourself and share some of your ideas, whatever's coming up for you around our sessions today and over the next few weeks. And you can reach us also on Twitter with that hashtag, on Facebook. And the CQ website that's listed at the bottom there is where you'll find the full symposium program and a link to register for future sessions. So today we have a couple of things queued up. We're going to have a fantastic session. We have a keynote address by Joan Eakin and Denise Gastaldo, followed by some Q&A and then a panel in the second hour. We'll have a brief 5-minute break between the first and second hours. And I'm going to just share with you now the Dean's welcome message.
Hi, I'm Stanley Brown. I'm the Dean of the Dahlana School of Public Health, the faculty that has the privilege to host CQ. It's my pleasure today to send my very best wishes and my congratulations on the 10th anniversary of CQ. For me, CQ embodies the true meaning of a collegial enterprise. It's been innovative, it's developed substantial capacity in critical qualitative health research, and at the same time, it's always been reflective and used the same tools that it teaches and that it uses to inquire into problems in our health system and our public health system to look at itself and constantly improve. I want to send my congratulations to Professors Eakin, Gastaldo, and Gladstone for your leadership. I want to send my congratulations and my thanks to all the faculties that have participated in CQ over the years. And I want to wish you the very best for the next 10, 20, and 30 years going forward. Congratulations, and I hope that today's celebrations and proceedings go very well. Thank you.
Okay, and now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Brenda Gladstone, who's a professor in the Dahlana School of Public Health and the current director of the Center for Critical Qualitative Health Research at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on the theory, method, and practice of participatory, arts-based, and critical qualitative methods in research with young people with a particular focus on children's mental health. And I turn the floor over to Brenda to offer some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you for the warm introduction. And thank you, all of you, those of you who've worked for some time now on the CQ at 10 Planning Committee, and also our keynote speakers and session leads and panelists to come. And a particular thank you to Blake Poland, our tenacious chair of the CQ at 10 organizing committee, who had no idea, of course, when he agreed to take on the role that he'd be planning not one, but 2 events as we move from an in-person pre-pandemic celebration last spring to virtual sessions we have to look forward to today. And I also want to thank Blake for having the great good sense to hire Kira Kastner. Kira has done a superlative job keeping us all on track, with also support from Tenzin Wutsang. So thank you all. I'm so happy to be part of the CQ at 10 Symposium. This is a unique opportunity to have a big conversation about an equally big topic, revisiting the critical in qualitative health research. No longer tethered to geographical space, this online symposium is a place to come in from the margins, to think together about our theory, method, practices, to think together about reworking boundaries that limit us, to open up possibilities for what we can think and do, and what it means to be a critical qualitative health researcher today. I very much look forward to this 3-day event to mark where we've been as a global community of practice, and importantly, where scholarship and training in our field might be headed now. And so I want to turn over the mic now to Sean Mohammed, who will introduce our first keynote speakers.
Welcome to the keynote address for CQ at 10, Revisiting the Critical and Critical Qualitative Health Research, which celebrates 10 years of success and innovation and success at CQ. So we're very privileged to have Joan Eakin and Denise Gastaldo as today's keynote speakers. Joan Eakin is a retired professor in the Dalai Lama School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Trained in the 1970s as a medical sociologist, she became a pioneer of qualitative research in the health sciences and also in her substantive field of inquiry, work in health. She taught qualitative methodology for many years and was the founding director of CQ. Denise Gastaldo is the CQ's founding associate director. She's an associate professor at the Bloomberg Faculty of Nursing and Dalai Lama School of Public Health. And currently she's the education coordinator for CQ's interdisciplinary curriculum. Her research focuses on health inequities, in particular migration and gender as social determinants of health. And I welcome Joan and Denise as our keynote speakers.
Thank you, Sean. Bear with me while I start sharing my slides. In this presentation, we will tell you about the story of CQ as an institution, as a community of critical qualitative researchers working in the health science, where we regularly experience onto-epistemological and methodological dissonance and practice epistemic resistance. We will introduce our origins, the development of CQ as a center, and focus on the critical in how it was created, survived, and thrived. I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my slides. I cannot see whether they are, yeah, there is a little delay. Now we are good. So, although we are talking at the institutional level and our experience is located in the health sciences, we hope that individual researchers in whatever environment they are in can take something useful from the CQ experience and strategies. We will present our story metaphorically, in terms of being located in the belly of the beast. And here is our beast coming up. Of working inside as outsiders. I'm sorry, I'm having problems with the slides. They don't, let me see what happens. Yeah, here it goes. We present, I'll go back to this point. We'll present our story metaphorically in terms of being located in the belly of the beast, of working inside as outsiders, of constituting a counterculture to the prevailing academic order in a research-intensive university, U of T among the top in the world. For our guests from other continents, I would like to explain that increasingly in North America, public universities have become corporate spaces, where neoliberal thinking has become naturalized. Hence, the current focus on attracting large amounts of research funds and obtaining large donations locates those of us who produce a lot of knowledge with modest amounts at the periphery of power. However, we think of ourselves like the vital outside operating inside, the transgressive gut microbiome of the health science beast. This is a quote from Joan's paper on qualitative and transgressiveness. We see CQ as a microbiome, at first disdained for its function and location, then tolerated, then increasingly acknowledged as central to body functioning. And ultimately, we like to fantasize our influence will be recognized as controlling the brain, parallel to emerging theories of how the gut flora controls human cerebral function. As you can imagine, Joan and I had a lot of laughs working through this metaphor. And here you can see us. Next, Joan briefly describes CQ's history and our adventures before and after its founding. Following, we identify the key strategies that we have used to build an institution capable of advancing critical qualitative research from a location of epistemological dissonance, as I said before, where our understanding of power knowledge allowed us to replicate like strong bacteria.
Well, hello, all of you out there in this magical digital auditorium. I can't see you, but I can imagine all of you, some of you who I've known for ages, and those of you I know from class or in passing, and those of you I don't know at all, and I wish I did. Et bonjour, et bienvenue à tous et à toutes nos collègues francophones au Québec et ailleurs. Now, if I can just avoid messing up and disappearing into thin air, I'd like to start off with a very quick history of CQ, just to set the stage for telling you about the strategies that we've used to advance critical qualitative research in the health sciences. CQ came into being formally in 2009, but its roots go back to the early 1990s when I began to pull together a group called QUIG, Qualitative Inquiry Group. I was a newly arrived medical sociologist, qualitatively trained, and working in a social science department in the Faculty of Medicine, a unit that later became merged into the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. QUIG was an informal gathering of methodologically like-minded faculty, mostly from the applied and professional health faculties and research institutes around the University of Toronto. QUIG soon included graduate students, and we became a community held together by a shared sense of isolation and by the stimulation and colleagueship and comradeship, really, of running together against the grain. Marvelously, in 1999, Denise arrived at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Nursing and jumped on board. Our first connection centered on our own doctoral students and the university's limited educational offerings in qualitative methodology. There were, in fact, no graduate courses at all in the health sciences beyond the introductory level. So we set about addressing this deficit. At this time, many introductory courses tried to fit everything in a single course: design, theory, data collection, data analysis, research dissemination, and all the practicalities of writing protocols, ethics approvals, research dissemination, and so on. It was just impossible. So we divided up these topics so that they could be dealt with in 3 courses. One addressing the theoretical foundations of qualitative inquiry, The next dealing with design and data generation, and the third focused entirely on interpretation and analysis. Even then, there was a lot left out. So over the years, we added courses on particular forms of qualitative inquiry. But the trio of core courses here remains till this day as the bedrock of our curriculum. The courses drew in students from our two faculties, nursing and public health, and from beyond, like rehabilitation, medical sciences, and health administration. Once the educational agenda was solidified, Denise and I moved on to other structural challenges in opening up the health sciences to qualitative research. We put a lot of energy into creating a research community, the microbiome sheltering us critical microbes. And we established a seminar series on methodology, which turned out to be a key catalyst for pulling researchers and their ideas together. Once the internet came into being, we developed a listserv of qualitative researchers inside and outside the University of Toronto and began passing around interesting material that we thought would be useful. Connection with colleagues beyond our local scene was very important in the development of QUIG. We started inviting scholars from abroad to spend time with us, some of whom sat in on our courses. And Eric Mikulovsky and I hosted a national workshop on the teaching of qualitative health research in 2004. These activities helped expand the reach and the minds of all of us associated with QUIG, and importantly, helped generate an organizational presence and base of authority for qualitative research in the health sciences, which was key to what we then and now were able to achieve. All of this was pretty much in place or in nascent form by 2009, when we formally became a center and changed our name and logo from QUIG to the Center for Critical Qualitative Health Research. Our formal founding marked the moment in which we really took up our posts as outside microbes inside the belly of the health sciences beast. Amazingly, we're still alive and well, antibiotic resistant to this day. So now we want to explain how CQ managed to flourish as a group of resident aliens, as I have called them. Denise will start by characterizing our general approach, and then we'll identify some of the most important strategies contributing to CQ's success.
Thank you, Joan. With a combination of critical theory and qualitative methodologies, it's no surprise that CQ was not exactly at the heart of the conventional health science research enterprise. As I have mentioned, CQ is rather located at the periphery of power. Usually emerging areas play it safe to achieve recognition, but we thought occasional cramps are part of the process and getting established. So we decided to show how complex, meaningful, and creative critical qualitative research really is. We came to think of ourselves as part of the critical microbiome that produces epistemic resistance and engages with transgressive practices. And for this presentation, we named our general approach to the development of the center B. difficile. As you know, the Clostridium difficile bacterium is known as C. difficile. So we decided to name our approach similar to other organisms causing trouble in public health and healthcare. There are 6 main strategies we adopted in our B. difficile approach. The first one was identifying our research as critical. As you know, the term critical is in the name of our center. It is a deliberate choice. Although there are many definitions of critical, we define our own take on it. And here I pause for you to read what we published on our website as our definition. The center's title allowed us to create a particular identity. We're not doing just any kind of qualitative research. We wanted to distance ourselves from positivist forms of qualitative research that, in our view, don't maximize what the approach is capable of offering and don't produce much new knowledge. So further, we used critical rather than advanced to get around the accusation that we were elitist. It enabled us to insist that qualitative inquiry studies social phenomena, and for this reason should be grounded in social theory, epistemological situatedness, and achieve theory methodology congruence. But repeatedly, people thought we were just being difficult. Critical qualitative research studies struggle and resistance, reviews power relations that shape people's experience in particular contexts, and asks who benefits from current power arrangements. In our Be Difficile approach, we use the same knowledge to be critical of the rules that were applied to us as academics, as Joan will tell you.
The second strategy that was important to CQ's place in the health research universe was our assertion that qualitative research is a science. We refused to cede the label to those maintaining that they were the only ones doing real science. We do science too, but we do it differently. We use science in the generic sense of it as a deliberate, theoretically grounded, and systematic process for producing knowledge. Along with reclaiming our research practice as science comes rejection of the common narrative that because qualitative research does not adhere to the canons of the scientific method, it can only describe and can't generalize or address matters of causality. We resist the conceptual framing of science as procedure and propose that qualitative research is science with a different paradigmatic logic, one in which we can and do description, generalization, and explanation. As methodological imposters, this insistence is indeed Be Difficile at work. A third strategy was to center CQ on methodology. Method is paramount in the health sciences world we inhabit. So a focus on methodology was in part a political necessity for claiming a legitimate place in this academy. It helped counter the prevailing view that qualitative research is no more than a toolbox of techniques for collecting soft and non-numeric data. After all, who can't do a semi-structured interview and summarize what was said? More importantly, though, a focus on methodology helped us raise the quality of our research so that it can produce the kind of new knowledge we claim it can. We positioned our research in a different space from the quasi-positivistic forms of qualitative research common in the health field, as Brenda Gladstone and I wrote about in our recent paper on value-added analysis. Further, and most importantly, we strategically and insistently located CQ on advanced methodological terrain, commitment to what I have called methodological prime. CQ was not in the business of proselytizing and growing the number of people doing qualitative research. Rather, our ambition was to sharpen the cutting edge of the field methodologically. This positioning was crucial to the education of doctoral level researchers and had huge value for those teaching at this level. I speak here from my own experience because nothing improved my own research practice more than having to teach methodology to doctoral students. However, it wasn't so easy to limit ourselves to advanced level instruction. We were ensnared by our own success. The demand for qualitative research training had risen greatly, and pressure was put on us to expand in the direction of highest student demand, entry-level instruction for health researchers new to qualitative research, many of whom were unlikely to ever become full-scale qualitative researchers. The dilemma was that if we met the demand for introductory teaching, we wouldn't have faculty resources for teaching at the more sophisticated and innovative level. We have retained our emphasis on advanced methodological training, but with difficulty because of many other structural impediments to such a strategy, such as lack of student access to social science theory. Remember that many of our students come to qualitative health research with little or no background in social science or the humanities. Teaching at methodological prime was also thwarted by other structural conditions, such as the lack of thesis supervisors who themselves have advanced level methodological expertise. and also graduate programs designed for the tempo and format of conventional science. A fourth key CQ strategy was to operate both against and with institutional forces, particularly in the years before we became a center. We resisted institutional formalization. We did everything beneath the university's administrative radar screen. We went by the old adage that it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. We simply did things on the cheap using voluntary participation with minimalist administration. However, we found that we needed institutional status to give us visibility and some authority to act and be heard. So we became a formal center within the university's administrative structure and had to relinquish our feral existence. But institutionalization, of course, comes with a price. We experienced new pressures to collaborate with other educators and researchers who sometimes wanted from us what we didn't want to do, like, for example, make qualitative science more accessible and less difficult to do, dumbing down to qualitative light, as it were. We also found ourselves struggling with the expectation that we would join collaboratively in the surge towards mixed methods. Many of us felt that combining methods based on differing epistemologies, especially where the positivist or quantitative agenda was in the driver's seat, would drain the qualitative part of the mix of its special creative capacity. We want to be nice team players in the institution that harbors us and enjoy the advantages of being a recognizable institution within the health sciences, but we did not want to compromise our distinctive methodology. It was a conflict between our need for institutional legitimation and our need for transgressiveness. We practiced a tricky kind of collaborative resistance, where we played the game, but sometimes didn't. We collaborated, but in a subversive, be difficile sort of way. Denise will now take up the last two strategies that we use to position CQ as a productive outsider within.
Thank you, Joan. Building a strong community of practice was an important strategic effort of CQ to achieve our status as critical microbiome. Since 2009, a group of approximately 20 academic fellows meets twice a year, but also works in subgroups, such as the awards committee. The academic fellows' research productivity is impressive, but together we work as a community with shared purpose. Over the years, some of our achievements were to create a space of solidarity, learning and teaching each other, and constructive disagreement. To produce shared narratives, terminology, examples, and stories to support those undertaking critical qualitative research. To offer a seminar series over 2 terms of the academic year for the Toronto research community, later made available online. To present and publish articles acknowledging the epistemological dissonance of our practices and pointing to potential forms of resistance. One of the positive effects of having almost no funding, as John has said, is that those who join don't do so for the perks, as Paula Gardner ironically jokes, because once we got her a pair of socks as a CQ gift. A final important strategy was to set an interdisciplinary curriculum for graduate students across the health science. We are very well known for that. So that became a cornerstone of CQ. We got to the conclusion that to promote academic transformation towards a pluriversity, not a university, but rather a pluriversity, we needed many well-educated graduate students to work in Canada and internationally. And here you can see our doctoral curriculum. By now, CQ has trained students from all continents, and many of our former students now teach qualitative research in their respective undergraduate and graduate programs. Instructors from public health, pharmacy, rehabilitation science, kinesiology, and physical education, nursing and social work meet biannually to exchange pedagogical strategies and propose curricular improvements. Collectively, we have offered a biennial symposium on teaching and learning, produced dozens of educational videos, a book about where to study qualitative research in Ontario, paradigm taxonomies, guidelines for writing a dissertation methodology chapter, among many other resources to support learning. BTV still here means we have high expectations for our students, who are the future of the critical microbiome. Creative and resilient researchers who we wish will benefit from our advocacy work and will engage with more transgressive forms of scholarship, decolonizing methodologies.
So these are the main institutional strategies that we forged as we bobbed along through successes and failures, and that we used in building the institutional authority of CQ, authority that was needed to help reframe how qualitative research was viewed in the health sciences, and how it was practiced, and how it was taught and modeled to the students developing in our midst. In closing, we'd like to offer a few final overthoughts to take away from this introduction to the day and to the three-part symposium. First, let me say that CQ was no easy-peasy adventure. The vision of qualitative research put forward incurred considerable pushback and indifference from the mainstream health research community, who could either not accept our approach to doing science or preferred varieties of qualitative that did not rattle their fundamental understanding of the knowledge-making enterprise. There was also some resistance from qualitative health researchers who did not identify much with our methodologic values, such as the importance of social theory in qualitative interpretation, the need for epistemological consistency, and the creative presence rather than the objective absence of the researcher. Sometimes, however, qualitative researchers were reluctant to engage with our kind of research because they worked in institutional environments that did not encourage a research craft that stretched scientific orthodoxy or could produce inconvenient results that could be difficult for conventional science to defend. For more on the realpolitik of doing critical research, join in session 2 next week of the symposium. Despite the challenges of practicing critical qualitative research, which most of you know well, particularly those of you in the health sciences, we urge you to not get bogged down in the prevailing narrative of beleaguered qualitative researchers struggling at the margins of the dominant science, impeded by the indignities and frustrations of being considered substandard. Instead, celebrate transgressiveness and its discomforts. It has a lot to offer you as researchers. Transgressiveness is the soul of critical qualitative research, from where it derives its energy, non-complacency, edginess, creativity. Transgressiveness and methodological marginality are ultimately more an advantage than a burden. There are many collateral benefits of operating at the periphery, including the sharpening of research skill and a degree of conceptual clarity and methodological self-awareness that does not come out of homogeneous places of intellectual comfort. Critical qualitative research is fundamentally a subversive science, and CQ is an institution that claims authority not as an end in itself or for self-aggrandizement, but as a means to open up new ways of knowing, to pry open the cracks, to let the light in, as Leonard Cohen's song goes. We seek to reveal and account for perspectives and situations that are taken as given or are unknown, especially concerning those who are vulnerable and inequitably positioned in society. It is, however, important to be humble in our passion for this form of research and to apply our critical eye also to our own ways of knowing, their limitations, blind spots, and presuppositions. Critical qualitative research is not the only way of knowing and of improving the human condition. Who among you, after all, would be lining up for a COVID vaccine developed through qualitative inquiry? We must also, however, cede space to new ways of thinking that are stirring the qualitative research universe. For example, decolonizing, anti-racist, indigenous, and human decentering ways of knowing and doing. You can hear more about the ecology of knowledges in the final symposium session that will consider where we are going as we move into CQ's second decade. Wherever modes of inquiry and knowledge production go in the future, I'm guessing, or maybe it's just me hoping, that the core of what we currently do best as critical qualitative researchers will persist, including questioning basic assumptions, including our own, and generating new concepts, our most powerful contribution to knowledge, in my view. Understanding phenomena relationally and in context, using theory as a methodological resource for making sense of data, making visible the workings of power and the injustices it can generate, finding, by the end of a study, better research questions than you began with. In this last respect, T.S. Eliot just has to have been thinking of critical qualitative research when he wrote what is one of my all-time favorite quotes: "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So now, enough from us. We would like to hear from you. Sean, I believe you have some questions or comments that have been posted for us.
Yes, thank you, Joan and Denise, for your fabulous presentation. Very engaging, very interesting, and really resonated with me as someone who has also trained at CQ. We have about 20 minutes for questions and comments, so please type your questions in Zoom using the Q&A menu, and as a moderator, I will pose them to our speakers. So we do have a question, and this is an anonymous person who says that it strikes me that a great deal of this presentation narrative is to place yourself as the other, relating it to illness. Can you tell us about your choice of metaphor?
Bacteria is not illness. The exterior inside, it shows that we are all related and there is no individuality and isolation. So it's all about context. So the metaphor is about thinking contextually. It's about operating from as an outsider inside, acknowledging that we are working from a place of great dissonance. We have, Joan and I have been working together for 20 years, and this is one of the things we're celebrating today. And over this period, we have experienced all sorts of very difficult academic situations, precisely because we were perceived as others, as different. But we decided that rather than complain and, see ourselves as victims of a system, we would, create new spaces and make things different so that our students don't have to go through what we experienced. To a certain degree, other people, I would acknowledge, in other parts, even harder experience than ours. But in any case, it was a way to act, create, interact, and always thinking of bacteria as context, as outside, inside.
Jonah, do you have anything to add to?
No. This is Denise. The origin of this metaphor kind of burst out of many of our conversations, and we didn't, at any time, we weren't thinking of illness. We were actually thinking about the emerging literature on the value of the biome, the gut, all that's happening in there. And we would laugh about how, in the end, it's going to turn out that we control everything. So it was not an illness metaphor at all. It was an inside-outside metaphor.
Okay, there's another fantastic question. So how do we free ourselves of this other identity? Have the conditions changed enough in academia and communities?
Joan?
I don't think we actually need to free ourselves as another. I think a lot comes from actually seeing ourselves other, because in many respects we are other. And the minute we start feeling like, well, there isn't really any difference, is when we actually probably are letting go of some of the things that really are different between ourselves and the way other people do research. I don't regard feeling other as feeling like badly about it, or feeling, that it's really problematic. There are times when you do, when you're indignant and you're upset because you've been put down or you haven't been heard. Mostly it's people don't care. It's not so much that they put you down, but it's more to just say we should revel in our otherness and make something of it, because it's in fact the otherness that has been able to give us so much, and to generate a lot of what we've been able to produce is precisely because we have been other.
There's actually a fantastic question, and relates to your comments in the presentation about transgression. And the question is, does the critical and critical qualitative research necessitate a critical research paradigm, or can you adopt a critical approach in the research process while using a post-positives paradigm, as with health intervention evaluations?
We have used a paradigm table at CQ, some of you don't know, where we think critical, including postmodern, post-structuralist, and other forms. So yeah, we don't use the traditional take. So we have a much more larger encompassing definition of critical in our practice, and it incorporates, because we are in the health science, and the need for differentiation and clarity for the colleagues to understand what we do, we have been more, let's say, encompassing and inclusive in our definition of critical.
I agree with what, I echo what Denise was saying. Although I think with the notion of critical, I always thought of the notion of critical as being the possibility for a bridge with all those others out there. I mean, maybe we're not the other, they're the other from our perspective. And I thought of critical as being a possible bridge, because in fact, of course, people can be critical without being qualitative, for sure.
Of course.
And in the future, for example, that may precisely be the way that we can link with other scholars, other people who are operating with a very different notion of what science is, but the critical will be what the binding force is, not the methodology, the critical. So I definitely think that critical can certainly be done by others with different kinds of methodological orientations.
And to clarify a point, every scientist uses critical thinking. We hope everybody who went to a university is a critical thinker. We're not talking about that. We're talking about ways, epistemologies that help us to think differently. So just to clarify Joan's point, so that some people have never been at CQ and may not understand these elements. So just to clarify.
The next question is related to the previous question. It's about this notion of a kind of outsider, insider. So in your experience, what has been some of the most successful arguments you've used to persuade positivist scientists, those who say that they do science and we do something else, about the power of critical qualitative research?
Well, I've spent my entire career trying to convince people of what qualitative has to offer. So I've honed it down a little bit, and I do have a bit of a sense for what is heard. Some of the most powerful, well, certainly the kind of arguments that I've made that have shaken up audiences the most, is when I argue that not everything is measurable. That always upsets people, because they think everything ultimately can be counted in some way. But there is a lot out there that simply is not countable, it's not measurable. And qualitative gets at something different than other methodologies get at. And it also can get at things that are problematic in the empirically based research methodologies. For example, in qualitative research, silence and the absence of things are incredibly important. And they contain meaning that is meaningful for our interpretations, for our understandings. So that the strength of qualitative is it gets at things that can't be got at through other kind of methodologies. Not good for everything. For sure, it's not good for everything. As I said with the COVID vaccine, I wouldn't want to get a vaccine that a qualitative researcher had developed, for goodness sakes. But qualitative can cast light on things that are in the darkness of our current conventional methodologies. And so I've tried to always argue that it's not that it's better than, or that it, somehow it's superior. It can get at things. We're all in this, and knowledges are always limited in some way, qualitative as well. But what it can do, I try to make the argument for what it can illuminate and to provide examples for what it can bring out that other methodologies can't. That I have found has always been the most important way that I could speak to non-qualitative folk.
Thank
I
you.
will just briefly mention that I have used some terms that sometimes intrigue and provoke colleagues. Such today I picked pluriversity rather than university, so that we move away from the universal ideas of knowledge, right? So sometimes using this terminology is also a way of provoking and engaging and creating conversations with colleagues that are meaningful for everybody, and creating these bridges that John referred to.
Just a reminder to people to please type your questions in the Q&A. We don't have the chat function for this particular presentation. There is a theme emerging in the questions about structure, the funding, availability, staffing, academics. And I'd like to attend to that a little bit. So in your experience, emerging researchers often have a hard time to compete with other types of research for actual funding, promotion, resources. In your view, are we destined to be the other, quote, poor cousin?
Do you want to start, Denise, or?
Sure. At the end of the day, I keep telling all my younger colleagues what counts is publications. It is in the formal academic setting, people want to see whether you publish or not. I have published a lot without money, a lot. Reviews, working with the community and coming up with a new idea that could become a concept and creating a position paper. So I think my scholarship has to have social impact. That's the thing. Both John and I think, are examples of people who created different rules and operated according to this. And after a while, yes, there are some hardships. I hear you, but after a while, the excellence, the quality, and here we're not bragging. Yeah, I can be super critical and tell you all that is wrong with my career too. But some of these things we've created, working with communities, working with the government sometimes, it activated this use of knowledge, and it was all done with small grants. But yes, in my faculty, it took me 16 years to be told to go for full professor, while my colleagues in 5 or 6 years have said, lots of money, go, right? But do I really care about playing the rules and obeying the book of good guy and appreciated girl? No, I never did.
I think also that question speaks to CQ's agenda, that is, apart from education, I mean, obviously producing good qualitative research is the most important way in which you can get ahead. You do a good quality one and it'll go someplace, despite the difficulties, it'll go someplace, because there's a lot of crummy qualitative research out there, I'm afraid to say. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is CQ has taken on a role precisely to deal with these structural difficulties in people's careers. And we've produced a bunch of documents, like a document for promotion in academia that sets up a framework for how to evaluate qualitative research, because that's not known. I mean, there's countless problems that are structural like that. And CQ, that's why CQ is so important as a center, as an institutional entity, because it can take on some of these structural things. As individual researchers, it's really hard to do, but we've always wanted to do more in the area of of putting forward the case for qualitative researchers, how it have to have different people reviewing those grant applications. You have to, you know, it has to be understood by qualitative researchers, not just somebody who's done a few interviews. And so those structural things, they need an organization, they need a community of practice like CQ to help change those conditions, to make it easier for us to get ahead.
And we are going to post on the website the reference of our talk, so people have access to all these papers with the links. So some of them are there.
I think there's another theme emerging in the questions around people who are emerging critical qualitative researchers, like myself. And this is a fabulous question. So what advice, strategies would you give to emerging critical qualitative researchers working in spaces and teams that do not use a critical approach?
I would say that the burden of being a minority in any way, in all situations, in all contexts, is educating others. You know, I know we say, oh, it's unfair to ask minorities to educate, but I've been a minority for most of my life and I educated for most of my life. So I would say emerging scholars have a dual role. It is a heavy one, but there is a benefit from it. And I want to highlight the benefit because Joan and I reflected about that as we're writing. As you are in these spaces where people don't understand, partially don't or fully don't understand what you're doing, you end up becoming a better scholar because you constantly explain in a better and better way, in a smarter way, how to think, how to use different paradigms, how to bring. So now I go to meetings and people say, oh, wait, Denise is coming. She will have an idea and a metaphor, you know, and like I acquired this, whatever it is, this prestige of having ideas and metaphors. But it's funny, isn't it? It's just because I lived with the minority, a few minority identities in my life. And I had to, you know, constantly be doing this dual role and thinking, how do I explain that? How do we put this idea forward? How do we help colleagues to, you know, and acknowledge when people are getting it? I always am a kind of a cheerleader for my colleagues who are fully trained in quantitative research and they start to think differently and get paradigms and see, oh, we don't have to impose the positive stake, but rather we can coexist, right? And I'm talking about ecology of knowledges. So all these are my strategies to, you know, and I've done that since I came to U of T. It has been 20 years in the go, and somehow it has been successful.
I echo you, Denise. I have a couple other things to add. One, and I certainly echo your call for becoming articulate. To become articulate is so important, to be able to articulate what it's about, what your ideas are, even when you're working in groups with non-critical and non-qualitative researchers, which very often you are, certainly at the beginning of your careers. You don't have the luxury often to be working on your own little project. So becoming articulate is really important, but you don't get articulate in a minute. You don't, you know, finish your PhD fully articulate. I did absolutely nothing when I got my degree. And I, you know, now I'm retired, and it's only really now that I've come into being more articulate about what I do and what I think. It will come. Just keep at it and just work at being able to articulate, find good ways. When you see that you're connecting to someone with a certain idea, pack it away and use it again, because there are certain words, terms, arguments, metaphors that work better to explain to others. The second point is, if you find yourself working in an environment that is not critical or is not even qualitative, or it's doing some, you know, dopey little qualitative sidebar thing that is making you feel kind of bad and inadequate because you've been trained in a different way, and here you are participating in something that you know just isn't going to produce much, don't panic. You will find your ways, you'll find your moment. It's hard to find the perfect environment in which you can kind of fully blossom. You will find your opportunities to introduce a little idea. As Denise says, teaching. You're always teaching people you're working with and so on, and you will always be doing that. You'll find your moment to be able to just raise an issue, point something out, show that some concept works a little bit better, point out a concept that is actually not working very well. You will find your moments. It'll be slow. You'll come into your space sometime. Don't think it's going to happen all at once right this minute.
Just one last point, Sean, create a community. So if you are a young researcher, you are, in your first years, find another person like you where you are, or 2 or 3 or 4, doesn't matter. This is Joan and I went to visit her in 1999 in her office before the Lalana. And something happened there. We said, oh, we think alike, let's do something. And 20 years later, there is a center, right? Of course, Joan had quit going already, but you know what I mean? You cannot do it alone. You need a community.
We're about 3 minutes away from finishing, so I'd like to conclude with a question, thinking about future visions. What challenges and opportunities do you see for the momentum of critical qualitative health research, particularly given, number 1, the increasing corporatization of the university, and number 2, the pandemic?
This is a question for an hour answer, so we have a problem. Excellent question, right? I think, thinking like a bit of Codian terms, the more radical things get, the more explicit repression is, the more resistance we have to exert, we have to practice. So I see we are going towards a moment of radicalization, and I know in which side I am. So, I want to decolonize methodologies. I want to move qualitative research into the next 10 years in an even more radical way. So that's, in a nutshell, my answer.
I'm very aware of the extent to which the privilege I had to be a tenured professor with an academic position, with the freedom to think and do, that just isn't there for a lot of people. They're in other kinds of environments, and it's not easy to do that. One thing I found over the years is that if you can at all influence who you work with, that will help, because smart people who think, will get you. If they're working with you and you're doing things, they will get what you're talking about. So if it's at all possible to move yourself, sense who is kind of at least has an open mind to seeing things a bit differently. I discovered, for example, that I was in an office right next to a biostatistician. And we discovered we had a ton in common, because he had problems with theory. He had problems with being, the substantive applications of his methodology. All sorts of things were common. And he was a biostatistician. And we kind of discovered this. And I learned through him, and then through other people that I met, that when you work with, some people are very special, and they can get where you're at. So just keep your senses out there for potential partners and people to work with. They may not be there yet, but if they have the potential, then it's a good alliance for that. But I think the point is very well taken, is that most people are not privileged to be able to practice critical, peripheral kind of work like qualitative work. It's a big privilege.
Thank you, Joan and Denise. And I think we'll end the discussions now in the interest of time. So thank you for your keynote talk. Thank you to the audience for attending, for your questions and comments. Let's take about a 5-minute break. And after the break, we'll be joined by Naomi Tulin, who will introduce and moderate today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Tulin, and I am an assistant professor at McMaster University, and I'm also an academic fellow here at CQ. So we have a fabulous second half of the morning. Our three amazing panelists are going to talk about using critical theories and methodologies to have impact as critical qualitative researchers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce them all at once, and each of them are going to take about 10 minutes to speak, and then we should have around 20 minutes for questions and answers, and we'll wrap up a couple of minutes before noon and have you out of here on time. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody now. Our first speaker is Debbie La Liberté Redman, who is a professor at the School of Occupational Therapy at Western University. For those of you who aren't from around Toronto, that's just a couple of hours outside of Toronto in London, Ontario. Debbie is a founding member and executive committee member at the Center for Research on Health Equity and Social Inclusion at Western University. And she's also an adjunct fellow here at CQ. And her topic is going to be critical research in action, transforming conceptualizations and research practices. Our second speaker is Concha Zaforteza, who is the nursing director at Inca County Hospital in Balearic Islands Health Service and an associate professor at the Faculty of Nursing and Physiotherapy at the University of Balearic Islands. And Concha's topic is using critical theories and methodologies to support knowledge translation and exchange within institutional settings. And our final speaker is Lillian Magalhaes, who is an associate professor emerita at Western University, which again is in London, Ontario, and an adjunct professor at the Federal University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, an editorial board member of the Journal of Occupational Science, and a researcher with the Brazil-Canada Qualitative Network. And Lillian's topic is decolonizing international academic collaboration and publishing. So like I said, three excellent presentations. So maybe Debbie, we'll get started with you. And again, just like with Sean, if you want to type some questions for me into the question and answer box, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this invite to join this panel and to speak to my own experiences of critical research and action. And I want to thank Denise and Joan for such a great setup. I think my first few slides reiterate a few points and remind me that I am an alumni of public health sciences and where my roots are. So currently, as a critical qualitative health researcher located in a faculty of health sciences and a professional school, I find myself often being asked by colleagues and by students to articulate how qualitative health research can be of use within the health sciences. And while these questions as to the use of critical research can be frustrating to repeatedly encounter, I also think that ongoing critical reflexivity on our role is crucial to ensure coherence with our critical paradigm. As articulated by Denzin and Giardini, it's important to continually ask ourselves, what is the role of critical qualitative research in a historical present when the need for social justice has never been greater? In my own scholarship, I draw on critical social theory and methodologies to problematize the social political forces that shape interrelated health, social, and occupational inequities for collectives often positioned at the margins of society. Occupational inequities refers to unjust differences in access to a range of activities related to work, self-care, caring for family, social participation, education, and other realms. And these are seen as arising out of social conditions beyond an individual's control. My answers to the questions related to the contributions of critical work have increasingly coalesced around three of its intents: that of resistance, disruption, and reconfiguration. Related to resistance, critical researchers intentionally work against the status quo, that is, the way social conditions are set up, when these shape inequities, such as, for example, in my work, working against employment support services that are arranged in ways that reproduce forms of discrimination based on axes of difference, for example, related to age or class or ability status. Such resistance aims to disrupt inequities, working against dominant understandings that situate them as arising from individual failures and deficiencies, and seeks to disrupt complacency by showing how they're rooted in power relations. Such work is also committed to reimagining and reconfiguring discourses, social structures, practice, relationships, and systems towards more equitable conditions, thereby holding potential to inform reconfigurations. For example, healthcare practices that ally with older adults to dismantle ageist and ableist systems. Thus, critical qualitative research matters as it embodies a commitment to unveiling unequal relations or conditions that cause injustices and altering these through new viewpoints and possibilities. To illustrate my own experiences of critical research and action, I provide two brief examples. The first related to how critical reconceptualizations of dominant concepts bounding thinking in a healthcare profession can lead to practice changes. As within many other health professions, my health profession of occupational therapy is located within a current neoliberal context focused on individualizing social issues. There's been a dominant tendency within my profession to frame its core construct of occupation, which encompasses the range of activities people need to do and want to do to survive and thrive, as something that's individually determined and freely chosen. In turn, occupational inequities, such as differential possibilities for work tied to axes of social difference, are addressed as individual level problems. And occupational therapy practices often focus on how to fix individuals or how to assist them in coping or managing or overcoming socially produced inequities. This is problematic not only because it reproduces inequities, but it also means that occupational therapy can be complicit in contemporary power relations. So in large part, my work within OT has focused on critically reconceptualizing its core construct of occupation, trying to shift away from understandings of it as individually determined or equitably distributed to something that is always situated in intersecting social forces and part of how social power relations are done in everyday life. So I turn now to one specific reconceptualization that politicizes occupation, drawing upon Foucauldian-informed governmentality studies. So this concept evolved out of several SSHRC-funded studies, starting in my doctoral work, which was a critical discourse analysis of positive aging discourses, and then further developed through critical narrative research addressing retirement and critical ethnographic research addressing long-term unemployment. So occupational possibility shifts away from the idea that people choose what they want to do and everybody has the same choices, to turn attention to what people within a specific social historical context take for granted as to what they themselves and what others can and should do, as well as the occupations that are supported by the systems and structures in which their lives are lived, what are taken for granted and socially and politically supported as possible occupations for various types of subjects, such as those who are employed and those who are unemployed, differ across context and change over time in relation to broader systems of thought and values. For example, the occupational possibilities for persons experiencing long-term unemployment are not freely chosen. They're shaped through social policies, benefit systems, and social cultural discourses. Occupational possibilities are governed through the actions of various social authorities and agencies. As such, while individuals have room to make choices about their occupations, these choices are bound within particular possibilities shaped by larger social political forces. For example, possibilities for labor force involvement of older unemployed persons are shaped in relationship to pension policies, eligibility criteria for training programs, as well as ageist advertising and hiring practices. In relation to inequities, occupational possibilities are differently shaped for social groups. So occupations framed as ideal and supported by systems and structures, as well as those framed as not ideal, are different for those categorized as young or old, able-bodied or disabled, or as responsible or irresponsible citizens. So, what has happened with this concept? So over the past 10 years, this reconceptualization of occupation has been taken up by others in ways that I never imagined, nor maybe never even intended, but in ways that have reconfigured occupational therapy practice in line with critical theory, as well as research practices. As one example, the concept has been taken up in the development of an occupation-based community development framework by scholars and practitioners in South Africa. This innovative practice framework locates problematics related to occupational inequities, pervasive in marginalized communities, in social political root causes, and works in participatory ways with communities to expand occupational possibilities. In terms of research practices, the concept has been taken up in several contexts to disrupt dominant ways of thinking and doing in OT, as a means to open up spaces for reimagining and working towards expanded occupational possibilities, such as in research addressing youth living in poverty in the United Kingdom, various OT practice areas in Canada spanning from children to older adults, and work in Brazil attending to occupational possibilities for persons in mental health services. My second example focuses on work aiming to reconfigure research practices, specifically practices within participatory action research or PAR. This work is based on a body of critiques from various disciplinary spaces that raise concerns that PAR is increasingly disassociated from its critical roots which directed it towards ideals of full inclusion of persons experiencing injustices, critical consciousness raising, challenging power relations, and generation of social transformation towards equity. As the use of PAR has grown, so have concerns that its uptake into mainstream activities may mean its critical ideals have been sidelined, so that it fails to challenge and address inequities. A common critique is that projects do not succeed in enacting equitable partnerships with community members experiencing marginalization, raising concerns that power differentials are reproduced within the context of research. Participants can be positioned as objects of research from whom data is to be extracted, and participation may not extend beyond time-limited consultations, leading to tokenism. As well, concerns have been raised that inequities are addressed in individualized, depoliticized ways, removing from consideration power relations. As stated by Bryden Miller, this has meant that PAR is at risk of being tamed, routinized, and redirected towards more mundane and less threatening objectives. Another set of critiques relates to a shift away from ideals towards technical aspects, which can lead to a neglect of democratic decision-making and a lack of fit of techniques with contextual features. So working with a group of doctoral students and colleagues through various projects, including a critical interpretive synthesis of PAR studies done with older adults, we have sought to reconfigure PAR research practices through producing a guide for critical analysis, development, and enactment of PAR. This framework, which we now use in our own work for ongoing critical reflexivity in our PAR projects, is designed to support future scholars to optimally demonstrate commitments to equitable participation and social transformation, aiming to recenter PAR principles and practices through reconnecting it to its critical roots. Thank you for your engagement. On this last slide, I've listed some of the key references used to inform this presentation, and the slides will be shared. And I look forward to our upcoming discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I'm sure we'll have lots of great questions around what you shared about PAR in your framework. That's amazing. We're going to hold all the questions to the end, but please go ahead and type them in the chat box now. Not in the chat box, the question and answer box. And Concha, you're next. And Concha, you're still muted, just so you know.
I have to
There you
unmute.
go.
Yeah, I think it's okay now. Yes.
Perfect.
Good morning. I am here presenting on behalf of a group of people. There's a message for me in the middle of my screen. Okay. I'm presenting on behalf of a group of people that you can see here in the screen. I can't use my video because something's happening now. No? Oh, now. We are a group of critical researchers. We are in the Balearic Islands, and we celebrate, and we are very, very proud to be here because we feel ourselves as children of CQ, because through the years we've been working with them and sharing with them and learning from them, and we think they help us to be equipped with a critical toolbox that helped us to do science differently, to try to work to build an equitable and sustainable healthcare workplace or system. And we think they put us in the path of being outside in. So maybe we are part of the critical biome that either Denise and Joan were talking about earlier. And we think from this position, outside, at the periphery of power, we've been using this position as a lever for our purposes that I said before, to build an equitable, sustainable, and democratic healthcare environments. And today I'm bringing three methodologies, three critical qualitative methodologies that we've been using through these years to try to show how critical approaches in healthcare research can bring transformation. I'm talking about three methodologies that we use these theories. We are working with Foucault, Fraser, Falsborda, and Freire approaches. And we are talking about three methodologies: participatory action research projects, critical discourse analysis projects, and critical ethnography, and how with different purposes we achieved expected and unexpected outcomes. Then participatory action research projects were conducted in an intensive care unit and in a medical surgical hospital unit. The purpose was to inform decision-making in healthcare management, but not high-profile management, but micro-management at team level, at clinical and processes decision-making. And we had expected and unexpected outcomes. Our expected outcomes was change the ICU culture. We helped this ICU culture to be more inclusive for relatives and family, to enhance team processes, and either to expand their budgets in a context of cuttings. They could expand their budgets, hire new professionals. We had unexpected outcomes. As we had outdoor learning, we had to search for new methods to meet with people that couldn't commit time to spend with participatory projects. So we invent a go-along coffee break group interview. We don't know how to call it, to go there and share a coffee with people and research what was going on inside that places. Other unexpected outcomes was the change transfer to other contexts, And a very unexpected outcome was one of us was hired as high-profile manager due to the expertise in changing environments. And we managed to share with other colleagues throughout Spain, changing ICU cultures to be more inclusive and open. And it's not necessary to, well, our participatory action research in Spain is scant. So this is a novelty here in our context. Other project was critical ethnography. Our purpose was to challenge the hierarchical and normalized culture in healthcare multidisciplinary team. And again, we had expected and unexpected outcomes. The expected outcomes was the team reflects, talks, and acts on difficulties they were experiencing. And you can see up in the vignette, we address the elephant in the room, how they communicate and how they should communicate with each other. Unexpected outcomes. The team received an award, the healthcare team, because they were promoting horizontal relationships, and they had an award for that. And us, as a research team, received offers to support similar processes in other contexts. And this was very encouraging for us. As outsiders, we were being requested to do the same in other places. And the novelty is culture in our context is not usually challenged as we challenge this culture in this team. The discourse analysis project, this methodology, was used in a different manner. You know that worldwide we have had a crisis, an economic crisis. And I don't know if you know that in Spain, the healthcare system is a universal right. But in a moment, one of the governments cut this right and conceal the healthcare access to non-status migrants and to vulnerable people with low income that couldn't afford the medicines. So one of us started a PhD trying to reveal how either physicians and nurses in community healthcare, primary healthcare, were deploying resistant and struggle strategies to provide care to these people that had their care concealed. So the expected outcomes, or not expected, but outcomes were that these professionals were seen as ethical and political agents, and their strategies, they were systematized through this project and transferred for protecting other groups. The novelty was revealing and valuing ethical practices in a world that it seems that if you could not monetize something, it's not of value. Or if you can't count it in 1, 2, 3 manner, it's not of value. So this project had this novelty and put black on white what was going on in this context. So now I'm finishing. These were some of our projects using critical methodologies, but we had to deploy other strategies. For instance, as Denise and Joan were talking before, create a community of practice. Don't go alone. So we established a research group. It was very difficult to insert that group inside an institute, but we managed. We went on capacity building this critical biome. We improved our own skills with CQ, of course. We've been supervising students, master and PhD students for being critical researchers. We've been transferring knowledge, being visible in the academia, in science, in clinical. And we've been working with other co-researchers from philosophy and social sciences, and it's been very, very strong and very powerful for us. Other strategies, funded projects with many difficulties to get funds for our projects, but we managed. And establishing alliances. We've been creating bridges with the council, the Nursing Council, the government of the Balearic Islands, and unions too. This helped us to be visible and have presence in the public health life. I don't know how to express that. We've been requested. And later, we've been invited to co-design the Balearic Islands healthcare policy. So, very important, this critical biome that Denise and Joan were talking about before, because this helped us to grow and have our own projects and our capacity building. And that's it. I will wait for your questions, and very, very happy to be here.
Thanks, Concha, very much. That was really interesting. I especially like your idea of the go-along coffee interviews. I think I might start incorporating that into my work as well. So our final panelist is Lillian. So Lillian, if you want to go ahead and start screen sharing, and then we'll take questions after Lillian's finished.
Sorry, folks, I had to go back. Is everything fine now?
Yes, it is, Lillian. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, folks. I would like to thank the CQ colleagues for the invitation to contribute in this lovely celebration of the 10 years of CQ. I have been proudly involved with the CQ since its very beginning, and it is great to be here. This is going to be a very short talk in which I hope I will be able to bring my recent experience creating a line of bilingual papers with the Journal of Occupational Science. And I have the honor to sit at the editorial board with Debbie Redman, who preceded me. And this is an international peer-reviewed journal based in Australia. Bear with me because I am inviting you for a little quilting, a little in the nice tradition of Black women in North America is an occupation where we sit back and we mend some fabric pieces. So my talk is not going to be very structured. I just have some thoughts that I bring to you. Since 2017, I am the editor for papers in Spanish and Portuguese at JAWS. These papers are submitted by the authors in their mother tongue, are processed by Spanish and Portuguese speaking reviewers, and finally, after approved, are translated and adjusted to English. Then we process some sort of back translation just to make sure that the meanings were not lost after the translation into English. The translations are done by professional translators in Brazil and Chile who are not occupational scientists, but later the papers are proofread by bilingual colleagues who are familiar with occupational science. This project started by a small paper that I put together, and you see the paper in the slide, with colleagues from Latin America and Spain some 3 years ago. The paper reported a set of discussions that we had with English-speaking colleagues about the often misunderstood occupational science produced outside of the Anglophone sphere, mostly in the Global South. In the paper, we urged the colleagues to reflect on what could they be missing by not acknowledging that there is life, surprisingly intelligent life, if you will, at the south of the equator. We also reflected on the stereotypes often reproduced about the scholarship produced in other languages than English. And as a result of the very interesting reception of our paper, I was invited to start this bilingual line of publications. The project has been very well received, with several papers published so far. The bilingual papers remain open for a year after published, and the amount of views and downloads are 30% higher than the monolingual ones. We noted that many readers who access the papers actually download both languages and use it as a way to learn Portuguese, English, Spanish, English, or whatever, which has been an unexpected outcome. The interaction with non-Anglophone writers has been very unique, as they bring to the table a whole set of different reference, contexts, modes of reasoning, and so on, which certainly enrich the readership of the journal. Overall, the publication process takes longer than for the English native speakers. But since the beginning, we made the choice that time would not be imposed and that we would work meaning other than effectiveness. The project that has been expanded now to French, which is going to be the next language, followed by German and Japanese. In fact, JOS already offers summaries in Japanese. The Pledge Against Racism, recently published by the editorial board, for example, will be translated into 9 languages as a sign of the direction that we want to proceed. In the interest of time, I want to point out some key aspects that were revealed by this experience. These are taken from my own experience in charge of those bilingual papers, but also from the work that my fellow co-authors from that paper I mentioned, and I continue to reflect on. Research has been documenting geographical bios of the so-called impact factor and other forms of reception and evaluation of knowledge production outside the global north. One-eyed descriptions of social phenomena can perpetuate hegemonic standpoints despite good intentions. Horizontal collaboration is key for creation of what Paulo Freire would call an authentic dialogue. The recent decolonization wave, as I like to call it, if not critically scrutinized, can actually enact new forms of colonization, with the old settlers redressed, somehow recycled, but equally patronizing and condescending. There is not a unique way to think and to document the way we produce knowledge, and despite the discomfort, we must educate ourselves on new, old ways of telling stories, even scientific studies, striving for an authentic global scientific collaboration. This has been tried by several strategies, such as open peer-reviewed process and new forms of co-authorship. However, one huge trap that might be waiting for us is the so-called new visibility policies to give voice to minority and racialized groups. This actually can, when folks are welcome to talk about some subjects, folks from those minority communities, but this can mean some sort of revamped tokenism, as you only are called to talk about racism and stuff like that. And authentic collaboration should be in different areas of scholarship for what these friends or these groups should be invited. We should dispute also the notion of intellectual leadership, as the idea of someone leading the way in the area of knowledge production might entail the suppression of someone else's ideas and, most importantly, someone else's values. Although there is some fatigue around the contemporary polarization, two concepts may be essential at these somber times. The first one is the concept of chosen amnesia, a notion suggested by Suzanne Buckley-Zistel, which describes the memories we chose to suppress in order to avoid pain and discomfort. However, within critical scholarship, we might need support to bear to remember, which some name as the duty of memory, in order to honor traditions and lessons received from ancestors that might not fit in our highly prescribed and highly confined scholarship. So, in short, we must remember to avoid repetition, and we will need to remember still for a while. In closing, I take the opportunity to acknowledge that right now I am speaking from a city in Brazil called Campinas. This area is located 100 kilometers away from São Paulo, the capital. And from the data we have so far, this has not been an indigenous land. However, this area was one of the most prolific places for the infamous traffic of enslaved Africans in Brazil. There was a lot of unrest in the coffee plantations in this area, which prompted atrocious strategies to control the slaves group's resistance. In short, this was a setting for all forms of abuse against enslaved women and men from whom I descend. As you may concede, historical trauma has a huge impact on intergeneration relationships. And I would like, therefore, to recognize and to honor the legacy of my enslaved ancestors for the strength and energy that was passed to me through their example, but also by their joyful attitude, always in hope of better time. Today, coincidentally, November 20th, in Brazil, we celebrate the Black Consciousness Day. But unfortunately, the persistence of racism is undeniable. Critical research is therefore essential to achieve real change for all of us, for the ones who left, for the ones who are here, and for the ones who are coming. These are my mother, Maria José, 94, and my granddaughter, Olivia, 8 months old. Thank you so much. Muito obrigada. Merci beaucoup. I wait for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. That was a very powerful and timely presentation. Okay, and just a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions for the participants, to just continue to type them into the question and answer box, that would be great. So one of the first questions here is for Concha. And Concha, it's from Samita. And Samita says, we are conducting community-based participatory action research in partnership with homeless folks, people at risk for homelessness, and low-income racialized minorities, including Indigenous peoples, at a place in Ottawa called The Bridge. And then she puts in brackets, outside the Ivory Tower, and wanted to know if you're doing similar work in Spain. And sorry, Samita said, and she just typed
Yes.
in for Lillian as well.
In Spain, I am not sure in the rest of Spain. In my context, we are not working with this kind of groups. We have the intention, but not now. We have one of our students, PhD students, that wants to begin with this issue, but not now. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Concha. And Lillian, are you working with these folks where you're at?
Yeah, not really. With indigenous peoples, we have not been working recently. I do have, the university now has a new system, and we have been receiving indigenous students. And so I have 2 students that I supervise, and they both are doing work with their own groups, their own village. But they are in the very beginning, they just came in, so this experience is still being developed.
Thanks, Lillian. While we have you unmuted, there's another question that's specifically for you. Somebody is wanting to know more about the Canadian Brazil qualitative researcher links and organizations that I mentioned while I was introducing you. If you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, this is a group that has been on for 2 years now. We have been producing a lot of dialogue, actually, about qualitative research in Brazil. These people who are building this network, they are all somehow connected to Denise Gastaldo. And one big lesson is, if you are connected to Denise Gastaldo, you are connected with the whole world. So we have been expanding now the network. We have a website, we have some research going on. So I can put here in the chat bubble the link for you to go to the website, and then you're gonna have information in 2 languages, in Portuguese and in English.
That would be great, Lillian, if you could type that in.
Thank you.
Awesome. The next question is from me. It's a selfish question. So I do research with young people who have experienced homelessness, and I try my best to engage in participatory action research and using, of course, a critical lens. But for those of you doing participatory action research, do you ever struggle with who is your partner? You know what I mean? So you go in and you have a community partner, but then you have the young people that you're working with, and your job is to critique. So that can get ethically a little, have you come across that?
I think that's part of the complexity of power relations, in part because we're often connecting with a community through an organization, and that organization has its own interests in what might be going on in the research, which may be very different than what the community wants to be going on within the research. When I reflecting back on my own experiences, for example, doing a photo voice project with Indigenous youth, it wasn't the tension with the partner, which was the Indigenous Youth Center, the tension became with my own university because their recommendations for action were about changing policies and practices at my university. And so that was really interesting. And so we worked together to change those policies and practices, but it meant some really complex negotiation of power relationships. But certainly in that situation, I felt my allyship was with the youth I was working with and not with the institution in which I was working. But I think for me, that's part of that ongoing need for critical reflexivity about power relations if we're really going to do critical PAR versus doing maybe more pragmatic PAR.
Thank you. Concha?
Can you repeat the
Sure.
question? I was taking notes.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I understand. So the question was from me, and I was just wondering, do you ever struggle when you're doing participatory action research? Who is your partner? Because like sometimes there can be, you're supposed to go in there and critique, and you have a community partner, but what if you see some stuff that's sort of against the community partner, like ethically, the challenge there?
Okay, our partner. You mean the we used to do the participatory action research inside the healthcare system, So our partner used to be people that is uncomfortable with something that is happening in their context, and they begin a little community of people that is uncomfortable, and they are our first partners. And then if this is the question, is this the question?
Well, keep going. I think so.
Okay, and then together with them, we make this community grow to find more people that is uncomfortable and wants to fix something in their context. And then they are asked as a group, and many times there's one leader that acts as gatekeeper and helps us to join us as one and build a system for sharing and being horizontal and not having just one voice. I don't know if that's the question. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. So I think you're saying there's power in the collective.
We are trying to flatten the power if we have someone in front of us that is very, very powerful and is using participatory research as a lever to get their own interests, That was the last one we had, that one gatekeeper got in touch with us because he had his own agenda. Mm-hmm. And we have to work hard because the other participants that wanted to change things didn't have that agenda.
Right.
So we have to negotiate a shared agenda and interest to launch the participatory action research. So the one who was our first contact was not the best to get in touch with the real problem and with real interest of the group of participants. I make myself understand. Yeah. So the agenda was absolutely changed, and the outcomes were others than the first intention of the first contact.
Yeah, no, I think you're highlighting the difficulty of doing participatory action research, using that critical lens, being true to the critical roots of what you want to do. We have about 4 minutes left, and this question is for each of you. And someone's asked, given the limited number of academic positions these days, how can critical qualitative health research be better fostered between academic and community contexts, such as with not-for-profit organizations? So Lillian, maybe we'll start with you.
Sorry, could you repeat, please? I had some sound problems here.
Yeah, no worries. So given the limited number of academic positions these days, how can critical qualitative researchers better position themselves, how can critical qualitative health research be better fostered between academic and community contexts, such as like working with non-for-profits maybe?
Well, in Brazil, the context is right now quite precarious, to say the least, for academic folks in general. We have in Brazil some political context right now where universities are demonized, are being demonized, and doing social research, doing qualitative research, let alone doing critical research, means putting you on the spot of very complex situation, less funds, less money, less opportunities to publish, because some journals will not publish depending on the topic of the research. So the situation is, in this very moment, not easy for academics, but we thrive. We thrive. We have been doing this for a while, and we continue to do that.
Thanks, Lillian. And then maybe Debbie, how do you think we can maybe foster academic and community collaborations, like working with not-for-profits?
Yeah, I know that one of the things that we've been working on across faculties in London is establishing a Center for Health Equity and Social Inclusion, which is a community university partnership. So we have over 30 community not-for-profit organizations who are part of that partnership, and trying to use that as a hub to create research ideas and then to start, the participation at that idea of the actual need in the community, and then thinking about linking researchers with not-for-profits. And I'm not going to say it's working perfectly, and there's lots of tensions. There's demands on community organizations to do like program evaluations rather than participatory research. And so that creates some tensions in terms of various needs. And some needs, become very immediate and they're not very participatory. And at the same time, you're trying to create participatory work. But I think creating those kinds of hubs where you form those relationships over time, I think are really valuable. And I hope, just like with CQ, 10 years down the road, we see those relationships coming to fruition through some participatory work. But I think it's going to take some time to form the kinds of relationships that work for kind of a reciprocal kind of participatory types of research.
Thanks, Debbie. That sounds like you're doing great work in London. Concha, we have about a minute left. Do you have any ideas about how we could foster some better collaboration with a community context or not-for-profits?
For us, is very difficult because I don't know if in your context, but in Spain as academics, we have to struggle with publishing papers in Q1 journals. So you have to concentrate on that direction. But to foster relationships with other communities of practice and with, for instance, non-profit organizations, we have to commit time and as Debbie said, to establish hubs. For us, there's no other way of doing that. But we have to. I don't know if it's your issue, but we have to struggle with the papers we have to produce that are not in the direction of making links with, for instance, non-profit organizations. So we are creating hubs, as Debbie said.
Thank you, Concha. And thank you to all three of you. Those were excellent presentations. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Blake, now.
Thank you so much, all of you, for a fantastic set of sessions today and presentations. And thank you also to Shan and Naomi for moderating so skillfully today. And just a very quick heads up about what's coming. We have 2 more sessions in this series. November 26th in the afternoon, we have a session on the realpolitik of critical qualitative health research with the following speakers you see on the slide. Please join us for that. You can find the link below to register if you haven't registered already. And on December 4th, we have a keynote address by Judith Green, who is the co-editor of the journal Critical Public Health, and a panel of early career scholars in this area who will be kind of enlivening our proceedings with their thoughts on the next 10 years of critical qualitative health research. So please join us for that. Please also connect on the Padlet interactive networking and ideas board for ongoing conversation between and after sessions. Remember, if you arrive late or want to revisit any part of what you heard today, a recording will be made available, and watch for a feedback survey that we'll be sending after the last session on December 4th. And thank you very much for joining us today, all of you who presented and contributed questions and in the dialogue. And it was wonderful to have this time with you all. And our next session will be a tiny bit more interactive, but still with a full agenda. So we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everyone. And thank you especially to Kira, Tenzin, Obadiah, everyone who, the organizing committee who's named more specifically in the program, who've been fantastic to work with in pulling all of this together. And wishing you a good rest of day and weekend. Thank you.